Hello everyone, my name is Kim Kuzmeskis, Vice President of Marketing with Tandem 7. Thank you for joining our webinar today, Adding UX Value to Agile Development, Creating Applications Customers Love. We're very excited to have Jeffrey Hammond, Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester Research with us today. Jeffrey will be sharing some of his latest perspectives on how multi-channel affects customer engagement and how your design and development approach must evolve to respond to this shift. Additionally, we are equally excited to have with us Tandem 7's David Clark, Vice President and Design Director, and Ian Buchanan, Product Manager at Version 1. Dave and Ian will demonstrate how the right tools can bridge the gap between design and development, helping you continuously release products that delight your customers. At this point, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Jeffrey Hammond from Forrester Research. Without further ado, Jeffrey?
Thanks a lot, Kim. So when we talk about user experience value, why now? What's pushing us ever more in this direction? Well, what I would tell you is it's primarily because we're entering the fourth major age of how business is conducted. If we look back from 1900 to 1960, it was really about manufacturing. That was how you drove profit, through scale and efficiency. And every single unit and the variable profit for every unit is what allowed you to basically grow your business and lead the market. Starting in about 1960, we moved to a new era, the age of distribution, where efficiencies in the supply chain and in the distribution of raw materials and finished product was where organizations drove the next level of profit growth. Think about the golden years where Walmart was growing and creating a supply chain for everyone to fear. We've recently been in the age of information where the ability to control that manufacturing and efficiency through data processing and to control the supply chain and make decisions quickly has allowed us to achieve an additional level of profitability. But now we're entering a fourth age, which we at Forrester have called the age of the customer. And when you look at satisfying the customer's needs and working in a world where the customer has as much information as your employees do about your products and what make them valuable to them, the ability to create a great customer experience becomes an increasingly important part of winning the value. As a couple examples, the reason that we're at this point is because we've finally gotten to the point where in the fourth channel, the digital channel, we have gotten to the point where we have all the pieces that we need to serve, to transform industries through software, not just hardware, not just people, but through the digital channel. And we've gotten to the point where the digital channel has now become the most effective, the most cost-efficient way of serving these organizations and serving these customers. Let's look at some examples. In the hospitality industry, in the 1960s, the 1-800 line was really a breakthrough for a company like Sheraton because it unified hundreds of different individual lines at each different hotel and allowed customers an extremely convenient and easy way to call up and get a reservation at any Sheraton hotel around the United States. But when we moved into the age of information, that convenience of the 1-800 line gave way to perfect information on the internet and to sites like Expedia and TripAdvisor that could allow you to compare different properties across multiple brands. Now we're in a situation where startups like Uber and Airbnb are moving beyond the hotel, allowing you to trade the cost and convenience of a hotel and a known brand for individual apartments that are made available by folks that have extra space to compare. If we look at the payments industry, we've moved from an era of distribution with credit cards and checks to an era of plastic and information and credit cards being used to control the flow of payments to a level where software and dongles connected to iPhones and Android devices are being used to redefine the payments industry, and where small startup companies are essentially taking on giants that have traditionally used barriers to entry and scale as essentially their competitive differentiators and ways to keep the industry regulated. Whether it's industry after industry, we're seeing this transformation where software and the ability to redefine industries through the digital channel and increasingly the mobile channel is changing customer expectations. A great user experience is part of meeting those customers' expectations. Now, as hard as that may sound, it gets even worse because we're constantly seeing customer expectations shift from when a new feature is introduced, delight because it's unique and it's valuable and it defines the brand, to basic, to table stakes. And the rate at which that's shifting in the digital channel with software is growing ever faster. So think about the banking industry. 100 years ago, when the first bank branches were introduced, they were the defining feature that caused delight with customers. You could go to the local branch and make a deposit and then go and get your money out. Over the next 50 years in the banking industry, we saw branches move from features that delighted customers to features that were table stakes, essentially things that they expected as part of doing business with a bank. Let's fast forward to 1972, where the ability to deposit checks and to deposit cash without having to get out of your car was a delightful feature that defined the customer experience relationship. And over the next 20 years, we got to the point where that was just expected, that all bank branches had deposit from your car. If we move forward even faster, online banking. From the point in time when the first ability to move money around from your browser, the ability to make deposits and manage your accounts in the digital channel appeared, to the point where that was expected as basic table stakes as part of your banking relationship, was about 10 years, 50 to 20 to 10. Now let's fast forward to mobile. From the point in time at which USAA introduced direct check capture and deposit from taking a picture of a check on your iPhone or your Android device, we've now seen that become table stakes, a basic feature that any online mobile banking application needs to have. And it's happened in the course of about 18 months. So we've moved from delight to basic in 18 months because of the power of software in the digital channel. So basically, customer experience matters because we're in the age of the customer, and the ability to deliver that customer experience fast because the rate at which we go from delight to expectation is smaller and faster than it has ever been. These shifting expectations are what you have to deal with in the digital channel. So when we look at companies that are doing this well, companies that seem to be able to have their applications on just about any mobile device, on any tablet, are capable of providing a cross-brand consistent experience, not just in the digital channel, but in some of the older channels too, whether it's NPR on the radio, or whether it's Netflix on a TV, or whether it's Fidelity with branches in addition to digital experiences. We tend to see some common trends when it comes to the way that they build software. Now, they start with Agile development. And if you are not Agile, I can tell you right now, you will not be successful in the digital channel and especially in the mobile channel. But beyond Agile, they incorporate rapid feedback, they focus on useful, usable, desirable experiences, and they take their mobile strategies and unify them with their cloud strategies and their big data strategies into a singular modern application strategy. So how does it get done? Well, if you look at it from a process perspective, first of all, they work in a way that understands that they're figuring it out as they go along, and that because of that, you have to probe the problem environment. You have to sense the response of your probe, whether it's been successful or failed, and then take that, incorporate that back into your next development iteration. So this, in a nutshell, is the reason that Agile development is essentially required, because these probe, sense, and respond cycles of learning take place over the course of a number of weeks. It might be as little as 2 weeks, a single sprint, or it might be a couple of sprints over a 6 to 8 week process. This tight cycle of development and testing, beta testing with select groups of customers, deploying solutions, and then measuring the successes and failures is the critical competency if you want to be successful in the age of the customer. Now, from a development perspective, Agile, as I mentioned, is absolutely required, but adding continuous delivery and fast feedback on top of your base Agile process is the recipe to maximizing the flow of software from your development shop. So how do you do that with the right level of attention to detail when it comes to the customer experience? At Forrester, we'd recommend that you think about using the technique that we call POST. POST stands for People, Objectives, Strategy, and Technology. Now, we could have a whole additional webinar on strategy in the digital channel and the technologies that you need to select, HTML5 or native app development. But today we're going to focus on the first two parts of the POST technique, the people and the objectives. So how do you do that? Well, we would suggest that you define the people that you are going to enable by using personas. And then once you know the personas you need to support, you use them to reason about the objectives that those personas want to accomplish, the channel that they want to accomplish them in, and exactly how they want to do that. So first of all, personas. This is an example of a typical type of persona that you might see. The persona should define a discrete segment of your users. It should define how they want to interact with you. It should define their needs, their hopes, their goals, and their attitudes. Now, once you've defined a persona or a set of personas, commonly we see organizations using somewhere between 5 and 7, although I've seen as many as 16 for a very substantial application, you want to understand those customer journeys. So in addition to a standard Scrum-based process or XP process, you should use personas and journey maps as part of your design process. Now, the thing that's valuable about a journey map is it allows you to incorporate the idea of multiple channels, because the reality is, if I go back to that banking application, I might want to check my balance at the beginning of the day on my laptop or my desktop, but during the day, if I want to transfer some money or I want to make an electronic payment, I'm not going to pull out my laptop. I'm going to use my cell phone. And if I want to check to see if a stock trade has actually been processed because the market's doing really well, I'm going to pull out my cell phone again. So understanding how a customer interacts with you throughout the day, in which channels, will give you insight into the systems that you should build. One of the other tricks that we see companies using that have very highly rated mobile apps is they identify the points in the customer journey where the customer is either feeling really good about what's happening or maybe they're a little bit frustrated. They just bounced a check and that's making them kind of unhappy because they don't understand why they bounced a check. Or their paycheck just came in and they've got a really healthy balance, or they had a stock hit a limit order and now that's going to be deposited to their account. If you can understand these emotions and use that to factor in things like asking for them to rate your application, you'll find that you can consistently drive up your ratings. You can find that you can consistently work on the points of your user experience where maybe you're not doing that good a job, and over time, systematically improve your customer experience by using outside-in design techniques. Another thing that we see organizations that are working in this space using are wireframes instead of really long requirements documents. I'd almost go so far to say is the day of the 50-page requirement specification is dead. It's much better to work with journey maps, personas, and wireframes to do a little bit of work, run some experiments, look at the results of those experiments, and then incorporate what you've learned into the next iteration as rapidly as possible. Because of this, the move toward delivering work in small batches, we've seen an evolution of techniques, and in particular, we've seen the emergence of Kanban used in concert with more traditional Scrum or XP-based techniques, because it's a really effective way to move small batches of work through the development, testing, and deployment process as quickly as possible. This is an example of a Kanban wall with manual cards being pushed through the process, but an automated approach to Kanban is equally as popular, if not better, from a productivity standpoint, especially if you're working with distributed teams where they can't all see the same wall and make trade-offs around it. Now, I also want to say that it's not just about the upfront process where personas and journey maps are the most useful. Once you have deployed the application, you need to gather feedback about how you've done, and you want to take that feedback and incorporate it back into what you know about the personas. So in order to do that, you need to make sure that you've assigned somebody, whether it's a product manager, whether it's a VP, to listen to the feedback. on app stores if you're building a mobile application, through mechanisms that you've provided if it's a web-based application, through your beta testing if you're using a feedback management tool. You want to take that feedback and analyze it for recurring patterns of failure where you need to do things better, but also opportunity where customers really like what you're doing or they're giving you good ratings. You need to proactively reach out to unhappy users, and you need to build analytics into your application so you can actually see how customers are using them and see the real journeys and how they compare to the anticipated journeys that you thought your customers would take. If you do a really good job of this, you can begin to start to use this process to do A/B or multivariate testing where you try different things, you look at the responses, and you create a constant cycle of continuous innovation and continuous improvement. So to summarize, the increasing velocity that we are seeing in the digital channel as we move into the age of the customer is going to be the defining challenge for both IT shops and businesses alike. If you're not working closely across that boundary between IT and business, and if your development teams can't support that velocity through a process of agile development and continuous delivery, you're going to have a really hard time over the next 10 years. And if you've got a competitor that's got it mastered, you're going to find yourself falling behind. Agile is a great start. You should be using Scrum techniques, maybe some XP techniques as well, but you need to understand that it's something that you need to build on and you need to add to. Don't just be a purist and focus on one particular Agile practice. Focus on outside-in design techniques like the ones that we see in Post. Personas and journey maps and wireframes in particular are going to help you get started and are going to be a whole lot more useful in increasing velocity than the traditional requirements-based process. Connect those objectives that are defined by the journey maps, that fall out of the journey maps, into your Agile stories and into your Agile backlog or the backlog that you're using to run your Kanban process. It's a great connection point to a more traditional rapid delivery process. Use techniques like Kanban to drive smaller batch working processes and use that specifically to increase the velocity of your delivery. And above all, if you're delivering faster, make sure you're also measuring what you delivered so you know what you've gotten right, what maybe you didn't get so right, and feed that information back into the next rev of your development process. If you can do all these things, you'll be ready to survive in the age of the customer, and not just survive, but really prosper and use your software development and delivery capabilities as a competitive weapon moving forward. So with that, I'd like to turn things over to David.
All right. Thank you, Jeffrey. I'm going to take over the presentation here. We're going to go into the live product demo portion of this webinar and start with that slide that Jeffrey just had on his screen, the delivery process. And I think this is going to be a little fun because we're going to be tying some of the threads that Jeffrey put together in the live product demonstrations. And today we're going to be focusing quite a bit on sense, analyze, and respond in here, especially as we keep track of people and objectives. So what you're going to be seeing today is our live product demonstrations of UX 360 integrated with version 1. And you'll see how the two are used together to connect the research through user stories to the Agile development process. And we're going to focus initially on UX 360, just to take a look at a similar kind of cycle. UX 360 allows you to have a repository for ongoing research. And the key here is Jeffrey's ever-increasing cycle of probe, analyze, and respond requires that you build on knowledge that you already have. You don't want to reinvent the wheel every time and create a new set of personas and do your research as if this is the first time you've ever done user research for every project. You really have to have a repository to build on the knowledge you're creating over time. That requires you to store your personas, be able to create and store your personas, and also keep track of your task and scenario modeling. These do tend to stay evergreen over time. This allows you a place to tell stories about your people and their objectives, and ultimately take those objectives into Agile development tools like version 1. This sort of completes the cycle and allows these products to become a hub for this kind of activity. So I'm going to jump out and dive into UX 360 with a demo environment we call Little Wing. And Little Wing is a small airline, kind of like JetBlue in the early days. And you can see some of our personas are here on the dashboard. And the navigation across the top takes us through that cycle of research through projects so that you can make those hypotheses and start to get them built and tested. I'll take a quick look at research. So the tool allows you to store research over time. Here's a study done in the summer of 2012. And you're storing all of your data from those participants in the tool. You can look at a view of these participants, some of the things you learned in the study. If you can take photographs of them, you can get a feel for what it's like to be them using your applications. And you can take a look at this data and keep track of it over time. So let's take a look at an affinity group within this set of research. We've got all the demographic information next to each other, as well as all the more open-ended questions, allowing you to make hypotheses and to analyze what their objectives are and what needs to be done. All this feeds the persona creation process, and the tool allows you to create templates, which once you've built your template, you can start to use that for a set of personas. Here's a family vacation planner, Cynthia Blaylock, and here's another customer, business traveler, Lauren Bean. And we're using the same template for each of these. Once you've built it, it's easy to reuse it as you go across. And it's tabbed so you can add to what you know about Lauren over time. You might do a study about her mobile usage. You might do enough research to figure out what it's like to spend a day in the life as Lauren Bean, and also spend time figuring out what is the customer journey for our business travelers, starting from the prospect all the way through their million-miler status, taking a look at the touch points along the way. So as you learn more about your personas, you can add to them. I'm going to transition from personas to tasks right now. And we have found that tasks like personas tend to be evergreen over time. So even 30 years ago, the process of booking a flight had a lot to do with understanding the flight details, like what's your origin and destination, what's your departure and return date. These things stay with you from project to project. So why not just do it once and not have to repeat it every time? These tasks can be assigned to personas, and you can start to look at the overlap in your needs. As you can see, there are quite a few types of tasks you can keep in the system. These tasks are for a customer service representative on the Little Wing staff. And I'm actually going to go back into personas and take a quick look. We have a new set for customer service, and we've created Holly. So Holly's a customer service representative, internal to Little Wing. And you can see down here we have the tasks that are most important to Holly: returns management, order shipping, order entry. And if we look at these in the environment we use to create these personas, you can see that we've got that same task model we just saw, and that these tasks are just assigned to Holly so that we know that she, like some of the other people on her team, share these same tasks. If we wanted to create an application for Holly, we could go into the project section and start a new project. So let's create a project. We'll call it Call Center Refresh. And let's bring in a couple personas. So let's bring in Holly. Let's bring in Ian. And let's take a look at some of the intersection of the tasks. So we'll bring in Holly's core tasks. So returns management, order shipping, order entry, order check, and inline reporting. And I'll save out this project. And it presents us to us as a story map. So here's a place where we can have a holistic view of what we're attempting to pull off for Holly. These are the objectives that we need to achieve. And like any good story map, you can prioritize things. You can say, well, this one's not as important as deleting these guys, so I'm going to put that here. Or it could be a subset, or move it up and down. And you can also add more. So let's say that it's important for Holly to archive RMAs. We can add new ones, and let's put that at the bottom because it's not the highest priority. You can also add assets. So let's say that some design work that's been done could be a high fidelity or medium fidelity wireframe, or it could even be a smartphone photograph taken off of a whiteboard. These are the kind of things that can be retrieved at any time later by the team if they're figuring out what this is all about to bring up that wireframe. And now that we've got a pretty good idea of what we want to achieve, and we have a holistic view of our design, we can synchronize with version 1. And sort of warning me that I have to save before exporting, and I'll synchronize. It takes about 20 seconds to incorporate this data over into our instance of version 1. I'll just point out a few of the things here. We're focusing on the objectives for Holly. We know who we're doing this for, and the goal is to speed up this cycle so we can get to delight for her as a user. So that has been successfully exported over to version 1. Just going to take a look at things here and see if I can find that. So I'll go to the project tree. I called it call center refresh, and let's see what we got in the epic tree. So in the epic tree, I've got those high-level epics are here in version 1. And if I look down below, I've got these backlog items as user stories ready to go, even the one that I added on the project wall. And let's take a look if we have our assets as well. So here we have, let's take the links on this user story and see what we have. So here's that wireframe example we just uploaded. So somebody over in version 1, a developer who's just started to work on this user story, can pull that up and get a better shared understanding of what we're trying to pull off. And I think this is a good point. I'm showing what it's like when you first import these elements into version 1, but I think this is a good segue for us to take to switch over to Ian in version 1 to see what you can do with these assets inside of version 1. And Kim, it might be, since I'm full screen, it may be easier if you make that transition for us.
I think I've got the baton now. So yeah, so what we'll do is pick up where Dave left off, although we kind of pretend that we've moved forward in time a bit. We'll use a view of the version 1 application that we call our planning room. Planning rooms help focus on activities around the planning process and tracking over program level activities. So we're back now looking, looking from the future, and we've noticed that there is we've done a few things with this call center. We've filled out some of the additional epics. We've built out more stories underneath some of these. We have put estimates on them. We've even started to write code and test them. So we can start to see that kind of flow. Going back to what Jeffrey was saying about making small batches, one of the things that's very good about this is then our epics, our big level features, are already user focused. So that means every time we're making a delivery, we're doing something that we can talk to users about. So we represent that process here with having a development of a hypothesis where a lot of that information has already come in from UX 360. We may need some technical validation of that, so there's a step where we start to fill out some of that information. We go into our dev and test cycle, which hopefully is as quick as 2 weeks. For Agile projects, Scrum and XP really helps make sure that execution cycle is fast. Then we get into potentially beta testing or other forms of getting initial work in front of users. And even at that point, we may not be completely finished with all of the things that we intend. We still want to get it in front of users. And we get it out the door in the form of deployment. So this in these later phases, we want to be able to make sure that we tie back to the measurement and analytics that we're doing for this product. So in execution, we've got a pretty good flow going, but we really want to be able to drill down and check into things like what are the kinds of things that are holding us up. So we can click into a particular epic here, and again, we can go back and see the information in UX 360 that the ongoing research and learning that is going on from the UX 360 side. We can also do a visualization of the relationships that this epic has to other things. So one of the things it's got is a few obstacles on it. This looks like a bad one since I'm the product owner. Could be a bad or a good thing. So another thing we want to do then is understand if any of these obstacles are impacting our delivery plans. We often want to be able to make sure that the things that we're doing internally sync up with external events such as marketing events or other external events. So sometimes time becomes very important for those reasons. So we can use the epic timeline to understand how all of these things line up. So fortunately, all of the things that have blockers on them, I still have at least a month or so to go before I really have to deal with those before they start blocking my progress. So there's time ahead there. And then just to make sure that everything is flowing right, let's go check in on the team level. So I'll go into another room level. This is the team room where the activity of the team is tracked and monitored. Usually this would be where the team comes for stand-up activities. So we've got a test board up so we can see towards the end of an iteration where we've got quite a few past tests, some failed tests still, so we'll have to work through those and make sure those get worked out, and some tests that haven't quite finished yet. Some active conversations going on here. One of the other things that we can do with a team room is substitute panels. We've got a server status panel that comes from an external web source. So this is a good way to really bring back the business level metrics, make them visible to the team so that measurement and analysis phase of sensing is not just something that just the product managers do, but it's something that everybody can be aware of. So that pretty much completes the cycle. And with that, I turn it back to Kim for questions.
Fantastic. Jeffrey, Dave, and Ian, thanks so much for a great presentation. It's really cool to see how UX tools and even Agile development tools can really impact and support user-centered design best practices, all with the focus on creating great customer experiences. So as Ian said, let's get to some of your questions. I have a couple here that some folks have already entered in. If you haven't asked your question yet, please use the chat pane to enter it in. So let's start off. This one's a little bit long, so if presenters you don't mind following along and make sure you're off mute, we'll get to the question at the end here. It says, we're a very waterfall-focused company. Projects are created based on a fixed budget and timeline. There are downfalls of Agile development as well that weren't mentioned. Yes, prototyping instead of large requirements documentation is preferred, but you can never get rid of requirements gathering altogether. How do you suggest implementing Agile methodologies into a culture that is waterfall budget driven? Who wants to start with that? Jeffrey?
I'll be happy to start with it. Yeah, you put your finger on it. It's a culture. It's a cultural problem. Now the reality is that cultural change is going to be forced. The only question is the organization going to survive long enough to understand the cultural change that is needed? Now, that said, there are some specific situations where, honestly, a waterfall approach can work fine. In general, the more you know exactly what needs to be done and the less change that needs to happen and the more defined the problem space is, the less you need Agile. You need Agile when you don't know what you're doing, when you're trying something new, and where the value of failing fast essentially overwhelms the resulting slightly higher scrap and rework costs. Now, what I would tell you is I think there's a lot of situations where waterfall is used today, where people think they know the domains better than they actually do, and where business experts think they know exactly what needs to be done, but they don't. And so it's from that mismatch that we get things like healthcare.gov, which, where hundreds of millions were spent in what is, most certainly a waterfall-based process. And, they weren't really able to learn from mistakes early on. So I think given the reality of fixed budgets or budgets being done on a yearly basis, you need to start with educating the business users about why an Agile approach is going to give them better outcomes, because it's going to give them the opportunity to change their minds based on real data as opposed to issuing change orders when unfortunate things are discovered. Now, you may only deliver 1 or 2 releases a year to start off with, so that might not be that different than a traditional waterfall-based approach, but internally you're working with sprints so that every 2 to 3 weeks you are always able to demonstrate the current state of the process. I can tell you there are very few professional software ISVs that use that sort of waterfall-based process anymore. They have gone out of business because they just can't compete with the organizations that are able to move more nimbly, even if they only release once or twice a year. So if you think that you are in an industry where the demands of software are becoming more like a real company that essentially makes its living on software, then the change is going to be inevitable. The only question is it going to happen on your terms, or are you going to be forced to adopt it in order to compete?
Fantastic. Dave, Ian, do you guys have anything to add to that?
Sure. I think just to add to that, we all know that the transition from waterfall to Agile is difficult. It's a cultural switch, and the goal of the activity, though, is to increase speed. And in order to get that speed, you need to have a shared understanding of what you're building and who you're building it for. And we found that even during that period of transition, it does help to pick the right level of fidelity, and the greater sense of shared understanding between designer and developer allows you to move faster because you can work at a lower level of fidelity. You don't have to wait for some pixel perfect specification with all the I's dotted and T's crossed. You can, if you have a shared understanding, you can attach smaller specification documents and even in some cases whiteboard sketches to a user story, and your developer, if you collaborated correctly, knows what that means. And that allows you to move faster, even when you're still in sort of a quasi-waterfall transition period.
This is Jeffrey. Let me add 1 or 2 more comments to this. First of all, try the Agile techniques first for any sort of mobile projects that you have. In general, there are going to be a higher and higher requirement to use these techniques as you get further and further out toward the systems of engagement tier. You can use things like APIs to your traditional systems of record that can move more slowly, but the reality is Apple is going to update its platforms probably twice a year. Android is going to, Google's going to update the Android platforms probably 2 to 3 times a year. At a minimum, you have to you have to make sure that your releases work when a new version of iOS comes out. If your application breaks because iOS 7 came out and 60% of the users, of the customers, upgraded to iOS 7 within the first 2 or 3 days, it's not going to work, and your business sponsors are not going to be happy if they have to wait 3 or 4 weeks for an application update to be posted. So I think that you will see the most success with pitching the need to do to have a faster velocity the further and further out toward the edge of the systems that you are building.
Great, thanks. Okay, we've got a bunch more questions that have come in, and I'm glad we actually have the time to address them. The next one here, our company has readily adopted Agile development, but how do I explain that getting rid of a 50-page requirements document is beneficial?
Sure. Well, the first thing that you would do is you would say, what are the 10 most important features? What are the ones that we immediately have to deliver? If you haven't read Eric Ries's book on minimum viable products, I would encourage you to do so and begin to engage your business sponsors along those lines. So reset the conversation. Instead of saying, give us the list of everything that the system has to do and all the different things that we have to support and all the contingencies, you have to reframe the discussion. Who is the most important person for us for this system to support? What are the 10 most important things or the 5 most important things that that customer needs to do? How quickly can we deliver that minimum feature set and then begin to gradually add on and on and on? You see this even in things like the connected product space, traditional things that you might think of as embedded or real-time, where you see a new version of something like the Fitbit every year as the companies start to add more and more features on top of it based on what they learn how the customers use. We see it in the mobile space where the apps are continually updating and new features getting added based on the feedback. So you've got to turn the premise around and say, we're not going to focus on the 50 pages of things the system needs to do. We're going to focus on the first and most important things, and when we get those done, then we're going to take the next 10 most important things. And when we get those done, we're going to take the next 10 most important things, and we're just going to continue to iterate outward, but we're going to get the most critical items done first and make sure that they're done right.
Super. And Dave, Ian, do you have anything you'd like to add to that, or we have plenty more questions?
Yeah, I think I'd like to jump in and just kind of point out that one of the things that's important across both questions is really understanding how important it is to understand users. And that, if it's budget-centric, well, it's probably not user-centric. And if you're focused on long requirements that nobody really can take the time to read, it's probably not going to be developing the kind of building the kind of understanding between designers and developers that Dave mentioned in the last answer. So, yeah, I think the importance of user centrism in requirements is it can't be overlooked here for both cases.
Terrific. Okay, here's another one. And this was indirectly I answered in part of the demo, but this question came in a little bit earlier. So does all this apply if the applications we build are for internal use as opposed to consumer applications? So it should be a pretty easy one to answer.
Well, I would certainly think so. I mean, the reality is that IT systems and to a lesser extent employees that use those systems have been the cobbler's children for years. The thing is, since we pay people to use systems, they can use systems which are suboptimal and which really aren't organized around their experience because we pay them to do that. But, in some ways we need to get rid of the term user and just look at our internal employees as customers as well and treat them in a very similar way. What we tend to see is that they're already bringing in their own devices and they view those devices and the applications that they're using as consumers as better than what they get inside the firewall. So this move toward bring your own device and use your own platform is surfacing the need that these folks, these internal employees, want the same kind of convenience and the same sort of productivity from a user interface that they get as consumers. So I think the enlightened organization would really not differentiate between the two groups and would use consistent techniques across them, if for no other reason than the capability that you surface to employees today may be a capability that you surface directly to your end consumers 2 or 3 years from now. I'll just pick on Amazon as an example. The internal APIs that they were surfacing to their developers 3 or 4 years ago are now the APIs that they surface directly to developers as part of Amazon Web Services, and they're building a multi-billion-dollar business on top of it because they did not discriminate between internal users and external customers. And so I think it makes sense to do the same.
Yeah, I would say that in our client work, we're spending equal amounts of time with both their end user customers and the internal side of that. The saving grace here for the internal team members is that they're locked in a workflow with their customers, and so if you want to put that workflow online, you have to look at both sides of that. So you have to understand both of them as customers and make sure that you're optimizing both sides of the equation.
Terrific. Okay. So here's another one to keep us on our toes. What are your recommended approaches for incorporating usability testing into the Agile development process? Who wants to take it?
Well, I can say something that we do quite often. We bring folks into our offices and sit them down and work with them on new features that we're building to understand the usability of those things. And we have those opportunities because we aren't just doing software development, we're also doing services and can bring some of the people who are attending our training courses down to work with us. So I think there are opportunities in business that people kind of need to look to. That can you pull somebody aside from a line of people waiting to get service, or can you grab people who are online and pull them in for some usability testing? Those are some of the things you have to kind of like put into the product and the service streams that you offer.
Yes, I think.
Go ahead, Jeff. Sorry. I was going to say there's usability testing at all different levels of the process. When you are building wireframes, I've seen organizations that will go out there and they'll use social networking to pull together impromptu panels of customers, and they'll run the wireframes through the customer panels, and they'll make changes to those wireframes, and they'll take pen and paper sketches and turn them into lightweight prototypes within a day or two, and then use those with the next focus group that they bring in. You'll notice in that circular process slide that I had beta as a discrete step. And for organizations that aren't used to doing beta testing, because you don't build software for a living, you need to start thinking seriously about that. There are great tools out there that will help you run that process. That will, if it's an internal application, you get a particular sales division and you make them the beta organization and you rotate that through the organization. Or if it's directly to the customers, you allow customers to opt into the beta process. There are certain types of customers that will gladly use a beta because they think they're getting the latest, greatest stuff, and will give you that sort of feedback. And then if you've instrumented the betas and even the released versions with analytics, you'll see where the problems are. You'll see where the bounce rates are. You'll see where customers maybe hover and they spend a lot of time. You'll see where they comment about applications, and they'll tell you certain things that they don't like. So there's lots of opportunity before deployment, but even in production to essentially evaluate the usability and test the usability as part of your process.
I agree. I think to add to that, one message about testing is that every level of fidelity and formality can be valuable. And probably the most important thing to do is to just test regularly. Bring people in every week. Bring 3 people in every week. Test whatever you have, whether it's sketches. You'll get, to use Jeff Gotthald's term, the boulders in the road out of the way, and allow you to move down to more important elements after that. Just test regularly and don't worry about the fidelity of what you're putting in front of your customers.
Great. Okay. So now this one's next one's kind of interesting. It's not exactly a question, but an observation. Has to do with current events, so it might be kind of fun to get your perspectives on this. So it says, observation: the monumental failure of healthcare.gov is much more representative of a failed Agile project than that of a failed waterfall project. Both approaches can be done wrong, but that particular failure seems a lot more like a failed Agile project than waterfall to me. Any comments on that?
Well, I think I would disagree on that because you've got multiple sources of responsibility. It didn't look like they had product managers and product owners in the same room. It doesn't look like they had test groups that they were trying to introduce into the process early. It doesn't look like they shipped early iterations of the software and were able to demonstrate working capabilities. So I see minimal signs that they tried to use any sort of Agile process over the last 3 to 4 years. The very idea of taking 4 years to release something to the public from the time that the act was passed does not lead me to believe that they would be using Agile processes successfully, or if they were paying lip service and not actually using the principles to drive the project forward.
Good points. Okay. All right. Another one here. We use Agile very successfully in small pockets of our company. However, our main product development organization is clinging to the waterfall method and governance process they developed. How can we change the misconception that Agile is an IT approach only? Good question.
Well, interestingly enough, when you start adding additional principles in like Kanban. Kanban came from Toyota and is a a more a business organization process way of working than it is a software development process. So by expanding the use of Agile with additional techniques, by looking at things like continuous deployment and red-green testing or red-blue testing environments, by introducing analytics where you're getting feedback from operating software, you start to both move into the operations space, but then also move up to the business space. This is actually another issue with Agile. Agile will help solve the software development problem of not being able to push code fast enough to the point where it's deployed. But these other techniques will help you deploy the code more quickly, and then will also allow you to assess the code more quickly. Now, hopefully your operations teams are already getting instrumentation data and feedback data from how your applications are operating. If they're not, then that's a serious problem in and of its own, but engaging them on making it easier to get that data and being able to collaborate on that, what that data is telling you, is a good way to engage that organization. When you start to work with businesses and surprise them by delivering functionality earlier, or surprise them by being able to very quickly make changes based on what you're learning, we often find that the business gets it. The business is willing to spend more time with the IT organization. In some cases, the end result of what we're seeing here is we're seeing more and more developers that are actually aligned with the business, maybe even reporting directly to the business, especially as we start to see more and more mobile dev, where the devs are often aligned with the sales organization, or they're an agency that is hired by the marketing organization to provide the customer-facing capabilities. So I definitely see these techniques moving outside of the IT organization. It's as much focusing on the result, getting faster velocity, being able to make decisions about the business more quickly that the business is going to respond to, not the fact that you're doing a Scrum or that you're chipping away at your backlog. So you have to talk in terms that the business understands. Very few business leaders that I run into that don't want increased velocity, that don't want the capability to be able to change their opinion based on real-time information about what the customers are doing. So that's the way that you've got to approach it.
Yeah, I would say that we often see that IT is leading the charge here. The developers want to move to Agile the soonest. And the tricky thing is that there are at least three players here, where you've got the developers, you've got design, and with the increasing importance of customer experience, you have to make sure that your designers are not dragging their feet, that you're just imposing Agile on them. You have to do the cultural work to figure out how we're going to incorporate UX into the Agile process. And then the third leg of the stool, if you want to look at it this way, is the business. And I wholeheartedly agree with what Jeffrey just said. Most business folks would wholeheartedly embrace the benefits of Agile. The trick here is that the last thing that we see to change is the project funding model, the whole business process of doing big bang deliveries. Even that when everybody is ready to do Agile correctly, that funding cycle needs to also understand that it's not about big bang releases anymore. It's about constant competitive improvement of the offering.
And it's ironic, because if you ask the business folks whether they really think they're going to get what they pay for, very rarely do the folks that I talk to fully expect to get every last thing they paid for. They know that scope is going to slip. They know that that IT is going to come back and tell them, well, we can't do this, we can't do that, we can't deliver this on time. So it's the funding model, and the fact that it's the last thing to change is more an artifact of the dance that we do between business and IT than the reality of it being a good way to work.
True.
Great. Okay, so here's another one. We've got a few minutes left here. I think we can get a couple more in. How much time would you recommend spending on the UX work in advance in order to minimize the risk of refactoring?
I would say do as much research as you can before the engine starts churning, if you have that capability. But at the end of the day, you're going to be in a cycle, and in fact, you want to speed this cycle of building something and then getting true customer response to what you build. So you can do as much as you can up front before you start an effort, but the real gold is discovered, once you've built something. So I would say, echoing back to Eric Rees, just do the minimum. What is the minimum viable design to get a good response back from your customers?
Yeah, and I would add to that I see some organizations will do like a long, what they call long sprint zero. So they'll take maybe 5 or 6 weeks to do that first initial process instead of a 2-week sprint. But, I would say concentrate on a particular persona, the most important one. Concentrate on the most particular details about that persona, the basics of what need to be done. And echoing that minimum viable product, your goal is to get to the point where you start getting actionable feedback from those real people that persona is designed to, symbolize. So if it's a sales app, pick a particular type of sales person that that you have a lot of, the new sales guy or the top 10 seller, and do the persona, figure out what they need, put something in, and then start engaging with those people to see if you got it right. If you got it right, then either go on to the second persona with your next major sprint, or start going deeper with that existing persona if you've got a lot of them in your organization, or they make a significant impact to the business bottom line.
Fantastic.
That is a great point. Yeah, I would definitely echo that. Identify your core persona and make sure that it works for them. We have definitely seen that work successfully.
Terrific. Okay, we are coming up on our time now. So if we did not answer your question, we will be sure to follow up with you directly. We do have a handful more in the queue here. What a great session. At this time, I'd like to thank Jeffrey Hammond of Forrester Research, Ian Buchanan of Version 1, and of course Dave Clark from Tandem 7 for taking the time to share their expertise with us today. And I think for one of our more robust Q&A sessions, thanks to all of you for submitting such great questions. In conclusion, we invite you to stay connected with Tandem 7 for the latest information and thought leadership around user experience through Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and our blog. And of course, we hope to see you soon on tandem7.com. Have a great day, everybody.